Hey, welcome back. Thanks for being here. So today I'm thinking of this as like my Spotify wrap for the year, but for my books. So as I said in my last video, this past year I read 64 books, which I'll get into why technically, because I'm going to talk about one of the books today. But I'm going to give you some of the highlights and some of the just very brief, like capture your attention books to see if any of these sound good to you. Maybe you want to explore them this year and then we can chat about them together. But this is kind of a brief overview of some of the books I read. I feel like this year I read a few books that I thought were pretty fine, like a good chunk of the books that I read this year I thought were pretty fine. There were a few books that I struggled through, and then there were quite a few that I just absolutely loved. So today I'm going to share with you a few of the books that I loved, as well as, like I said, give you a little teaser for maybe if you want to read them, then you'll listen in and you'll think about reading them as well. So let's start first in the Christian literature genre. So I love to read Christian literature. Besides like literary fiction, that's probably my biggest category that I like to read in. Typically I'm reading 2 books at a time. That's like the most that my limited brain can handle with having small children, and so much of my brain capacity is taken up by them in this season of life, which I want my brain to be with my babies, but I cannot read 4 books at a time. I can barely keep 2 at a time, but that's the max that I can do. And typically how I like to do it is I read 1 book that's in the Christian fiction realm, Christian literature realm, and then 1 book that's in the literary fiction realm. So this book is a repeat read for me, but this is Dane Ortlund's book, Gentle and Lowly. If you haven't read this book before, this is a masterpiece, and this is actually a book that I read this year with my students since I teach at a Christian school. And essentially the premise of this book is thinking about Jesus's heart for sinners and sufferers. So I have found that this book has been hugely encouraging to me in my own Christian walk, thinking about how Jesus thinks of me, even in the midst of my own sins and struggles, and how he deals with me when I sin and when I struggle. I know that my students were really encouraged by his meditations in this book as well, and so many of them said that like they can't wait to read the book again. There's a lot of beautiful phrases in this book that like I regularly think through and pray through. For example, one of them is when he says, when you look to your sin, you can never understand how you could be safe. But when you look to your Savior, you can never understand how you could be in danger. Highly recommend this book. Additionally, if you've ever just wondered about Christianity and wondered about who the person of Jesus is, this is a great book to read. Full of scripture and full of references for who Jesus is, which is what you should base, any knowledge of Jesus on, not just based off of what somebody says, but what the Bible says about him. So definitely highly recommend this. And let me give this final little like teaser for this book. One of the things that he says in here is that think of like if Jesus came to earth to save sinners, then the very thing that compelled him to you is actually the thing that you feel most repulsed by and is so counterintuitive to what you think. And that's that Jesus came and drew near to you because you are a sinner. He doesn't draw back from you because you're a sinner. So anyways, if any of that resonates with you, highly recommend this book by Dane Ortlund, Gentle and Lowly. On that same note, I did not read this book this year, but I read it last year. This one people sleep on. I don't know why, but it's so good. It's called Surprised by Jesus, also by Dane Ortlund. It looks at Jesus in the Gospels, and so it gives gospel accounts for miracles Jesus performs, the way he deals with disciples, the way he deals with sinners, and then even in his own crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. So it's a wonderful way to look at just Jesus in the Gospels and what God the flesh did when he showed up on earth, when he came to it. Highly recommend that one as well. Surprised by Jesus. A couple more in the Christian literature realm. So there's this book that's gaining a lot of popularity called The Air We Breathe by Glen Scrivener, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And basically the premise of this book, it's short, but it's very well written. He's a British writer, and so he has a lot of that like British, pithy kind of humor. And so it's short, but it's like concise and great and really well done. And basically his whole premise is talking about like some of the things that we benefit off of in society are things that Christians have fought for over, centuries and centuries of time, that now we are living in such a privileged way that it's become ubiquitous. So things like, like love or freedom or mercy or justice, like some of those things that our society is built on, we don't realize are actually Christian foundations of thinking, and people had to build off of Christian ideals. So anyways, if that sounds interesting to you, I loved that book. I thought it was fantastic. And again, it's a great resource if you're interested in history and Christianity. So highly recommend that one as well. Another one, if you're interested in leadership books, but if you're like me, I kind of get allergic to some leadership books because I find that they use about the same 4 illustrations of Southwest Airlines and Apple, and they're like, hey, look at these beautiful leaders and their models, which is true, but it's a bit redundant to me. Anyways, but I still want to read about leadership. So there's this book called Leadership as an Identity, and it is written by a believer. And so he has a Christian perspective about leadership. But one of the things that I really enjoy that he does in his book is at the end of each chapter, he's talking about, a concept. And then at the end of each chapter, he has pastors give their own life experiences about that topic and say why that topic resonates with them. Additionally, there's one chapter in there that's on failure, and I was so encouraged by it. And I also couldn't have put into words what he was able to put into words in that book. His name's Crawford Loritz Jr. Yeah, that's his name. He put into words in that book how oftentimes we know that failure can be defining, and it is the thing that is the springboard for how we actually grow. But the way that he talks about it in that book is also sort of this emotional piece of failure and what's going on in the heart when we fail, and how we as leaders have to use that as deep identity work in our own leadership identities. So I highly recommend that book as well. Okay, a few others. I said in my intro video that I have a new baby. She's 9 months old. She's perfect and I love her. So in the very early newborn days, when I knew I was going to be up, all hours of the night, and I needed something to capture my attention besides Instagram, I was trying to find a book, and thankfully my good friend Val recommended me this book, and I just happened to start reading it. A lot of times how I get onto the next book is just a recommendation. And so I started to read it, and it's a thriller. And so every time that my daughter would wake up in the middle of the night, I was excited to wake up because I wanted to know what would happen next with the book. It's a Lisa Jewell novel. As I said, it's a thriller, so it's not uber scary, but it definitely leans on the side of you're wanting to figure out what's going to happen next in the story. And basically it follows 2 women in the novel and their neighbors, and one of them, Josie, she is kind of getting really close to the other main character, Alex, and she's continuing to build this friendship relationship. But as you go on in the book, Alex is a podcast host, and she's getting background on Josie to do a podcast on her. But as you're going through the book, you're like, this Josie girl, something is not right with her. And anyways, the more the story goes on, the more you want to read it. And I love a good don't want to put it down book, but I am not in the season of life where I can just read for multiple hours at a time. So it was a great middle of the night, I needed to feed my daughter for 25 minutes. I would pop back into the book, be able to pop back out, was very excited to pop back in whenever I could. I won't give anything away, but I will never look at a Canadian tuxedo all denim the same way. So that one's great. Okay, and my favorite series of the year, if you have not read The Inheritance Games by, oh goodness, who are the Jennifer Barnes. Yeah, Jennifer Barnes. So these books are fantastic. particularly if you like the movies, the Knives Out movies, and just sort of this like lock key mystery, but very fun. You're not playing detective to the utmost degree. I love a good mystery, but I'm not trying to figure out what happened most of the book. I'm just like along for the ride in the book. Anyways, the Inheritance Games, I read the first 3. I loved them. I thought the characters were super fun. They're very young adult novel, so angsty and teen-ish, but with a very fun backdrop. And essentially this girl finds out that she is going to get this huge inheritance from this family, and she has no idea why. And so they're trying to solve the reason for like why her. And it's her and these other brothers that are part of the family where they're supposed to get the inheritance. Anyways, I don't want to give too much away, but for my young adult class that I'm teaching in the spring this year, I am doing the first book of that, so I'm very excited to see what my students' perspective is on that novel. We're just doing the first one in class, but I will definitely keep you guys posted to see what my students say. Okay, next. Which one do I want to talk about next? Okay, so I don't purchase a lot of books, but I do have a few that I had physically already this year, and there were 2 that I purchased this year, but out of 63 books, I only purchased 2, so that's saying something. These others I had on my shelf. So let's do this one. So this is the one that I purchased this year because it was coming out in September. So this is Robert Galbraith's 8th book, The Hallmarked Man. So if you do not know, this is J.K. Rowling's mystery series. And if you liked Harry Potter for the character building, you will also love this series as well. So these books, every book stands alone in the sense that the case is different. So whatever the detectives are working on, that is different in each novel, but the characters stay the same. And so throughout the book, you're following one of the main detectives, whose name is Cormoran Strike, and his partner Robin Ellicott. And as the series goes on, you see their relationship developing in different ways. So this is her latest book. I found this one to be like, I loved the character development in this book, and I loved where Cormoran and Robin, like where they were going in this book. But I was also pretty frustrated by it in a good way, I think, but I was frustrated. But if mystery and character development in the Harry Potter way resonates with you, these are great books to read. They are a little bit bigger. This one was just shy, I think, of 1,000 pages. Yes, this one was like 900. Yeah, 897. Yeah, and like pretty small writing, but loved it. However, I will also tell you that this was not my favorite this year that I read from her. My favorite this year that I read from her was the one right before it, which was called The Running Grave. And so that one was a little bit longer than this one. And I read that one on my Kindle, and I will probably, like, how I like to read is, or how I like to purchase books is most of the time I purchase a book post reading it because I loved it so much that I want to have it on my shelf. So anyways, I am going to purchase The Running Grave because that book, a lot of her novels, you sort of gain interest in the case as it develops, but I wouldn't say that like from the very jump you're into the case, but as it goes on you get more intrigued. However, The Running Grave was different because as soon as that book started, you find out that they're dealing with a cult, and so you know that like that's going to be what they're dealing with throughout the novel, is what's going on with a cult. And that had me hooked. My husband and I could not stop talking about it. And even we both said, first page, you're in, because if you want to read about what goes on in cults, like, it's a great book. It's a great book. So highly recommend that one as well. Okay, a few others that I read. These ones we also had already from just the past, and I'll kind of explain one of them right now why. So if you like fantasy books, I don't even know if you can see all of them. Oh gosh, you can't see all of them. But behind me, my husband is a huge Brandon Sanderson reader, and he loves all of his books, and I am not a huge Brandon Sanderson reader. However, I should say this. I'm not a huge high fantasy reader. I dabble in fantasy just a little bit, but not very much. It's not my cup of tea. However, he kept on recommending this book to me, Tress, which is a standalone novel, and I highly recommend it and loved it. So if you like The Princess Bride, okay. If you like that book, this one is almost that in reverse. So it's like the girl gets captured, becomes, you know, a sailor, and that's all I'm gonna give away, but it is so fun. You can read this and then never read another book by him again, but I did love this one. I also read Yumi the Nightmare Painter by him, and I loved that one as well. But Connor did his Kickstarter, so that's why we have the physical book, and he got all of those. So that one was fabulous. Okay, just a few more. So this one is by Kazuo Ishiguro, and if you've never read The Remains of the Day, or, oh goodness, I'm gonna blank, but he's got a lot of great books if you've never read him before. But this one is called Clara and the Sun. If you like anything dystopian, this book might be for you. I really enjoyed this book thinking about how AI is currently functioning in our world today. So if that interests you as well, this is sort of like an exploration of AI, and there's basically this robot character that is interacting in the world around it. I'm also doing this book in my young adult literature class for the dystopian section, so I will let you know what my students think of that as well. Okay, real life hit. So this is a few days later, but I wanted to finish some of my top books of 2025. I do think I'm gonna do an overview of just my top 10 books overall of 2025, but this is just kind of a very brief lay of the land of some of my highlights from 2025. So I wanted to finish off this list with two books that I'm doing this semester actually with my students. So I would encourage you, if you have, you know, thought about some of the classics that you've read in high school and you haven't revisited any of them, I would invite you to think about doing so this year in 2026. Weirdly, I have never read the book Frankenstein, so I'm gonna read that book this year. It's just been sitting on my shelf. I hadn't read it for high school, and then in college I just never had to, even as an English major, but most of the time you read it in high school, so that's probably why. But I have found that as I've read books in high school and then reread them to teach them, or just, you know, just read them because they were sitting on my shelf, I've really enjoyed the experience. So often I feel like as teachers will say, oh guys, read this book, and then you need to read it again in 10 years, or you need to just experience that book again just when you're a little bit older and can understand more because you've experienced more life. There's certain books too that I think we should just revisit regularly, because as our paths of life change, the experience of reading the book gets better and better. So one of the books that I'm reading, or that I read this past year and then I'm teaching this semester, is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of my favorites. This book was life-changing for me when I read it my junior year in high school, and I am so excited to read it with my students this year. I am actually putting it in contrast with my favorite book of the year. If you haven't heard of it yet, you definitely need to read it. Theo of Golden by Alan Levi. So basically what I'm going to do with these two books is consider kindness and generosity, and how we should consider how to be kind and generous people, and what the goal of generosity is, as well as how we consider temperance. Also, overarching question with both of these novels is what makes a good life. I don't want to give a ton away. I mean, if you don't know about this book, then you've been living under a rock for a little while, but Jay Gatsby, main character, after Daisy, married to Tom Buchanan, you know the rest. But this book, if you haven't read it, so this is following the main character's name is Theo. He's going to a little town called Golden, thus the title, Theo of Golden. And he goes to a coffee shop and he sees a bunch of hand-drawn portraits on the wall, and he decides that he is going to start buying the portraits and giving them as bestowals to the people in Golden. And basically it's just sort of this like what do these acts of generosity do to the people and to the town. So highly recommend this book. I also am very excited to teach it because so often students struggle with reading books, and this one is very easy to read. It's also super short chapters, which I enjoy, especially in the season of life with having little kids. I love a short chapter because then I can grab it, put it down. I'm not in between something. And similarly, I'm excited for my students to experience that. So those are my last top 2 books of the year. I'm excited to give you guys my 10 favorites of the year overall, and also give you some tips for times that you can be reading when you have a busy life and many expectations, but how the purpose of reading is meant to be enjoyed and how you can do so in your daily life. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what some of your favorite books of the year were, and hopefully we can bounce some novels off of each other, and I can read some of the recommendations that you guys give.